along to oppress others? Or would I have been someone simply willing to go along and enjoy that privilege that I was offered? Now, on those days when I like to think of myself as a strong character, I knew I would have been one of those who stood up, even as a white South African, to oppose apartheid. But on my more honest days, I would think, 50-50 here, people, really. Let's be honest, that what was there that would be calling somebody as a white South African to question their privilege? It would be much easier to simply accept it and to live in a system that taught you that you were better. And starting from that experience of stopping and saying, what if I had been, has been then my question to myself whenever I come across someone who is described as other. What if I had been born into those circumstances? What if? Now, it's wonderful. It's easy to say, I know I could never have been that person. I could never have been, when we listened to the amnesty applications from people who had been police officers under apartheid at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they described the ways in which they tortured other human beings, that the first thing that came to my mind is, I know I could never have been that kind of person. But right behind it was, do you know you could never have been a torturer? And most of us sit here and say, oh, I know I could never be that person. And yet over and over, we have been shown that it does not take much to make us willing to dehumanize others. I mean, most recently, we had the psychology experiment in California where some students were prisoners and some were prison guards, and the prison guards were told, you have absolute power, and that they actually had to stop the experiment because the prison guards had become so cruel and abusive. Regular college students who knew they were taking part in something, and yet, given absolute power over others, they quickly, very quickly, became those who saw them as less than human. And so we know that it isn't simply that all that is ill resides in the other. We know that there are circumstances that might push us to being less than we think we are. And it is only when we recognize that, when we recognize that evil isn't something simply out there or across the ocean or in some other religion or ethnic group or language group, that when we recognize that it is simply a matter of allowing ourselves to be dehumanized and therefore dehumanize others, that we can see what a challenge it is to remain fully human. That if we say we are those who are striving for justice, we cannot achieve justice by pretending that we are saints. We cannot achieve justice by pretending that only good resides in us and only bad resides in the other. That is not the foundation for a just society. The foundation for a just society is when we recognize that the potential for greatness is in each of us, and that the potential for evil is in each of us. And what we are called to do and be is those who work constantly to minimize that potential for evil in ourselves and in our communities, and work to maximize and build up that potential for greatness. And that we start by opening our ears, our minds, our hearts. Our ears, our minds, our hearts to the many stories that make up our community, to the many stories that make up our world. That we start by admitting that there are stories we have yet to hear. Stories of people in our very own town. I have a very good friend who has spent much of his life homeless. And he talks about a program that was started in Nashville, but I understand is now national, and it's called Room at the Inn. And Room at the Inn happens in the winter, which you probably don't know much about over here. But that happens in the winter when different churches open their facilities to the homeless. And Carl says, you know, Room at the Inn is like the 5-star homeless shelter experience, because you go to the churches and they really put it out there. They offer wonderful meals, and often they will have somebody there to cut our hair, and there will be somebody there with clothes for us to choose from. There will be all kinds of services that the churches put on for us. And he says, and yet, the thing that most strikes me about that experience is that never do the people from the congregations sit and eat with us. That they don't sit and talk to us. And so while I walk in and have a wonderful meal and spend a night in more comfortable circumstances than I would normally have, I walk in a homeless person and I walk out a homeless person. And nobody has bothered to hear my story or even know my name. And that would be what strikes him about that experience, speaks to me of our need, all of us as human beings, to be seen and heard. And that we so often decide that there is a group of people whose stories we don't need to hear because we already know them. And they're the ones who we label, you know, the homeless, the welfare mothers, or whatever, you know, those people. We decide that we know their story, so we don't need to hear their story from them. That those people, whoever those people are. Now, right now in Tennessee, there is a community, an Islamic community that is trying to expand their mosque and community center, and they've had firebombing of the equipment and all the rest of it. And when you talk to people about what is going on, and they say, well, you know, those Muslims, well, have you ever spoken to one of them? No. Because those people have decided they know the story. And so they don't need to hear the story.